Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to be talking about importing meshes into Zbrush. That means bringing an existing topology that's been generated from outside of Zbrush into the program and then sculpting and creating a character based on that model. You may very well find yourself tasked with an instance where someone gives you an existing topology and says, we need you to sculpt the character from this, but don't change the topology. That might be because there's an existing pipeline that this mesh is part of that has UVs, maybe some rigging and animation already applied to it. It's very common that you will find yourself in such a situation where you need to work on an existing model. Now, the purpose of this lesson is to create the character you see on screen right now from this existing topology here. We're going to talk about importing OBJ files into Zbrush. We're going to talk about polygrouping meshes, organizing them so we can more easily work on things like the jaw and the ears. And we're going to also look in depth at sculpting with subdivision levels. And I think that's the most important thing. In Zbrush, you have access to Dynamesh, of course. And if you've watched the Quick Start tutorial or the Dynamesh tutorial, you're already familiar with Dynamesh. Subdivision levels are so important, and in this lesson we're going to focus in just on sculpting a character only using our subdivision levels and not Dynameshing. Once you understand the power of both Dynamesh and subdivision levels, you can leverage the strengths of both and be the most efficient and effective sculptor in Zbrush. So that said, let's go ahead and get started. So to begin with, let's import an OBJ. We do that by going to the Tool menu and clicking Import. That'll bring up the file browser, and I'm just going to bring in a generic male mesh, draw it on the canvas, and go into edit mode. Now here you see, if I go into frame mode, we have a simple basic topology, a human male model. Now this character has just a single polygroup. That is just the color of the mesh as we see it right now. Polygroups are seen when we turn on frame mode, Shift F, and that's this button here. If I turn off line, I can just look at my polygroups, and if I turn off fill, then I'm going to turn off the color coding. But we don't see any color coding yet because there's only one polygroup. I want to zoom into the head here, and let's isolate the ears and polygroup them. I'll do that by pressing Control Shift, click and drag, and that gives me this visibility marquee. If I press the space bar, I can move it over the ear and then let go, and that starts to isolate just those faces that were within that rectangle. If I press Control, Shift, click and drag again, but this time hold down the Alt key, that rectangle becomes red. That will hide everything inside the rectangle. So now I've isolated the two ears. I'll go to Tool, Polygroups, and I will click Group Visible. Now you'll see a new color code has been added to those faces. If I Control, Shift, click on the background, it'll make all of my polygroups visible again. And you can see there's two polygroups here now. There's the orange one for the ears and the gray one for the body. Now if I Control, Shift, click on a polygroup, I can isolate it. If I Control, Shift, click and drag on the background, I can invert that visibility. If I Control, Shift, click on the background again, here we go, I can make everything visible. So Control, Shift, click on the polygroup to isolate it. Control, Shift, click and drag to invert it. Control, Shift, click on the background to make everything visible. Now if I have a polygroup like this partially hidden, if I go to the visibility menu, I can use things like grow to grow visibility. I can shrink visibility. I could also use outer ring if I want to isolate just the outermost ring of faces there. If I have a portion of the mesh masked, for example, if I have the body masked, and I click Hide Point, it'll hide the unmasked points. Show Point will show everything again. So that's the visibility menu. Now, when I'm viewing polygroups, if we come back down to the polyframe mode, that's Shift F. Notice if I turn off line, it takes away the polyframe. And if I turn off fill, it takes away the color. So make sure those are both turned on if you want to see both of those at the same time. So let's isolate that ear again. What I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to sculpt on this ear. Maybe I want to give it a pointed ear, but you notice that my move brush affects the faces underneath it. So I want to be able to easily isolate this polygroup and work on the ear itself. So I'm going to isolate that polygroup and I'm going to click Outer Ring. And that's going to give me the outermost ring of faces around the ear. I'll go to Polygroups and I will click Group Visible. So now I have three polygroups. I have the ear, the ring around the ear, and the face. So I can isolate the ear and mask it. Control click on the background to invert that mask, and now I can easily sculpt on the ear without affecting the other faces. Now let's take a look at how we can do something similar with the mouth. I always organize my meshes like this when I bring them into ZBrush so it's more easy to work with them. If I take my move brush and I want to start opening the mouth, you'll notice that the move brush actually grabs everything underneath that red circle. So perhaps you'll think, well, I'll mask the upper lip. So if I mask the upper lip and then again try and move, you see it doesn't quite work. It still oversprays a bit. Now it is possible to go to the brush menu, go to M for move, and there is a brush called Move Topological. The Move Topological is a move brush that has an auto mask turned on. If I go to brush, auto masking, there's topological masking. If I set this range to 0.5, you'll see that I can actually topologically mask the effect of the brush. What that means is, under normal circumstances, the move brush will affect everything underneath the red circle. With topological masking turned on, even though this point is spatially close to this point, topological masking means it's only going to move points that are close to it on the mesh. So if I wanted to get to this point, I'd have to walk all the way along this edge to get to it. So that means I can move these faces without affecting the lower lip. The problem with this is it's a little slow, and you have to go in there and tweak the range setting quite a bit. It doesn't really suit me and my needs when I want to be sculpting and thinking and sketching quickly. It's very, very good for sculpting things like toes or teeth, objects that are close together that I want to get in nuance. But at the beginning stage of a sculpture, I want to be able to work very, very quickly and organically. So the easiest way I find to do that is this trick. If I go to the Tool menu and go to Morph Target, I'll store a Morph Target. Now you can only store one Morph Target on a mesh at a time. The Morph Target is just a copy of the mesh in memory. So if I make a big change like that and click Switch, I can switch back and forth between my stored version and the Morph Target. So I'm going to delete my Morph Target, store it again, and I'm going to go with the Smooth brush, and I'm going to smooth the mouth open like this. Now I'm going to use that same visibility marquee to isolate the lower jaw. I'm going to hide these faces. Make sure I get right up to the corner of the mouth. Just like so. Let's get those little faces there. There we go. Now I'm going to Control, Shift, click and drag to invert visibility. I will go to the Polygroup menu, and I'm going to click Group Visible. So now I have the lower jaw polygrouped. I can easily isolate it, but you say, Maddie, you've completely lost the shape of the mesh. That's true. So if I go to Morph Target, click Switch, I'll restore the shape of the model, but I still have that polygroup. So I can easily Control, Shift, click on it, Control, click on the background to mask, Control, click on the background again to invert the mask, and then perhaps I can go in with the transpose line and I can start to open the mouth. Or I can go with my move brush and I can open and adjust the lips independently of one another. Far easier, far faster than I could just using Move Topological. So here we've got the head, or the jaw and the ears isolated with some polygrouping. I'm going to show you how you can actually delete portions of a mesh. So for this demo, I only want to work on a bust just because we don't have a lot of time to go through the whole body. But I think it would be nice to show you some sculpting techniques working with subdivision sculpting, because we've talked about Dynamesh. But I think subdivision modeling is a very important thing to understand when it comes to ZBrush sculpting. So I'm going to just do a visibility marquee here to isolate a fair bit of the model. Oops. There we go. So that's a good amount right there. I'm going to hide those faces, and I'm going to go to Geometry, Modify Topology, and I'm going to click the Delete Hidden button. That deletes those hidden faces. Now I'm going to go to my transpose mask. I'm going to press W for move and make sure you turn the gizmo off so we have this transpose line. The transpose line, if I hold down the Control key and then click and drag, it's going to mask based on topology. So I've got a pretty good topology running along the torso here, but I'm just going to help it by creating a masking marquee like this. All I want to do is I want to isolate those arms. I'm going to click and drag to draw a transpose line here, and go to R for rotate. Now, if you want to learn more about the transpose tools, watch the video on the gizmo and transpose posing. I'm going to click the outermost circle, and I just want to lower the arms a little bit. I want to rotate these arms back and press W for move, and I'll click the center circle, and I just want to bring the arms out a little bit. I just want to relax the shoulders. Let's clear the mask, bring these points down a little bit, Press Shift for smooth, turn my Z intensity down, and let's just do a light smoothing there. That should be good. We could potentially go in, give it one more little rotation. Control, Alt, click and drag will unmask everything within that marquee. And W for move, we can spread the shoulders out a bit. There we go. So it just gives us a nice bust to work with. I don't like to cut the bust off at the neck. I like it to feel very classical. Cut things off sort of at the torso or the shoulders, just so it has a nice visual weight between the torso and the head. So once I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and save this. So I'll go to Tool, Save As, and we'll save this in our documents. Now, of course, if we were tasked with maintaining our existing topology, we would not want to delete faces from it. I'm simply deleting the body for the simplicity of this particular demo and to show you that it is possible to delete faces within ZBrush. Generally speaking, though, if you're bringing in an import mesh, oftentimes you're going to want to maintain all of your topology if it needs to go back out to an existing pipeline. But that said, I just wanted to illustrate for you how to delete faces and how to organize meshes into polygroups. Now, I want to point out that if you are working in Maya or 3D Studio Max or any other 3D modeling application, you can add materials to groups of faces. Let's say, for example, that you've selected faces and added different materials to them. When you import that mesh back into ZBrush, if you export it as an OBJ with those different material selections, if you go to Preferences, Import Export, there is a button here called Import Material as Groups. If you turn that on, any face that has a separate material assignment will be assigned a polygroup. So you can actually set up your polygroups in an external application and then bring it into ZBrush. I find that very, very useful with hard surface, with complex organic characters, or even just trying to set up facial groups in Maya and then import it into ZBrush. I find that very, very helpful. It's also possible to set up polygrouping based on UVs. So if I go back to Import, and if we bring in a model that has UVs assigned to it, let's go to our documents and bring in this model. This is a generic female mesh. Now there's no polygroups on here at the moment, but if I go to Z plugin, go to UV Master, and let's just click Work on Clone and Flatten, you'll see that this character has UDIMs that extend out through several regions. So if we go back to this character, because I have those UVs set up, those separate UV islands, I can go to Polygroup. And there is an option here to polygroup based on UV. So if I do UV group, every UV region gets its own polygroup. Now this can be very, very handy to organize complex meshes or just to create very quickly and easily polygroup tags that I can utilize as I'm sculpting. You may also find that you're just trying to extract a single displacement map for a specific area. So if that area is represented by a single UV, you can easily polygroup by UV, isolate the area, and then delete what you don't need and work on that. I find that very, very helpful when I'm working on inorganic pieces or complex props that have multiple pieces. I can isolate based on UV and then delete the parts that I don't need and then sculpt just on the thing that I need to work on. So that's another way that we can generate our polygrouping. So now let's go ahead and take a look at sculpting. We're going to go back to our creature. So because I did that work on clone, it changed my material. I'm just going to change my material back to the basic material too. And we're ready to start working. So we're going to begin just by selecting the Move brush. Make sure that we have X symmetry turned on, and we're just going to do a little bit of sculpting. I'd like to demonstrate sculpting on a low resolution mesh using subdivision sculpting technique rather than Dynamesh. So just to begin with, I'm going to start changing the overall shape. I'll use the Control key to mask out the eyes. Let's invert that mask. And let's go to B for brush, M for magnify, select the magnify brush. Maybe let's magnify these eyes a little bit. Go back to our Move brush, and I'm going to go to R for rotate. Click and drag to draw a new transpose line here. If you don't have the transpose, make sure you've turned off the gizmo. And I'm just going to rotate the eyes just slightly, just to give them a little bit of a rotation there. Clear my mask and go back to my move brush, and let's just make some big shape changes here. Let's bring the brow forward. Widen that nose a little bit. Let's isolate those ears, and let's scale those ears up. Just using that transpose line again. Oops, that's a bit too big. Let's mask them. Turn on visibility again and invert the mask, and I'm going to use Control-click on the background to feather the mask, and I'm just going to raise the ears up just a bit like that, and I'm going to take the move brush, just start to give them a little bit of a different shape. Let's isolate those ears again, mask them, and then invert the mask and go to Transpose Rotate. I'm going to draw a transpose line straight down the front of the ear, just like this. Make sure I'm in Rotate, and if I click and drag in the center circle, I can rotate those ears out a little bit from the head. Go back to our move brush and just continue to adjust the shapes of the eyes here. Adjusting that brow, and let's bring the nasal bone forward a little bit. Let's change our jaw and our muzzle. Now I'm doing a lot of this work, I'm doing all of this work at the lowest subdivision level right now, and I can't stress that enough. I always feel like you should make whatever shape you're trying to make at the lowest subdivision level that can support that form. That's very, very important. You'll notice that a lot of beginner ZBrush models have a certain lumpy quality to them, and that's simply because people are dealing with too many polygons right out of the gate. So while it's possible to divide your mesh up very, very high in ZBrush, and we will obviously do that at some point, you don't want to start that way. You always want to work with as few polygons as possible. That helps you get the best quality form and the best looking shapes. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the silhouette of the shoulders here. I'm going to go to Transpose again. I'm going to hold down the Control key, and I'm going to mask down the neck just like this. Control-click on the background to invert that mask, and I'm just going to draw a transpose line right up the spine. Snap to a back view, and let's move that line so it actually is where the spine would be. Turn off X symmetry and go to Rotate. I'm going to click the outermost circle here and rotate that neck forward. Go to W for Move and click the center circle and just bring it forward a bit. Now let's mask up to the base of the skull. Go to Transpose Rotate, and we'll draw one from about beneath the ear. That's close to the pivot point of the head. And let's bring that forward. And that just gives us a different kind of posture in this character. Let's turn our X symmetry back on, and we can just hunch these shoulders a little bit. And let's play around with the shapes of this nose. Zoom in. Make sure that everything maintains its dimensionality. We want to make sure that nothing is sort of flattened out or occurring along a flat plane on the face, because the face has dimension to it. It's happening around, cylindrical and spherical forms. So I think I might want to elongate the face a little bit. So I'm going to mask out the lower face. I invert the mask, just take the move brush, and I can just sort of stretch this down and out a little bit. Let's isolate that lower jaw and give it a mask. Maybe give it a little bit of an underbite. Again, we still haven't added any subdivision levels. This is entirely on subdivision level 1. We can get so much out of that single subdivision level. I take my move brush and just tweak this silhouette in a little bit here. Now you'll notice here that my symmetry has gone off. If you do lose symmetry, and we do have an entire video on restoring symmetry, but I'll cover this very, very quickly here. I'll turn off X symmetry, and I will Control, click, and drag. I'll mask one side of the mesh. That's the mesh side that I want to keep. So let's keep this one over here, which doesn't have the kink in the edge. So I'm going to mask the side I want to keep. I'll go to Deformation, click Smart Resim, and that'll resymmetrize the mesh, so it's the same on both sides now. Turn my X symmetry back on, and I can continue to work. Let's go to the top view here, and I just want to bring out the cranial mass. Let's take the move brush, bring that forward, bring these nostrils out a little bit. We really don't have a lot to work with for the nose, but we just want to get the most basic sort of shapes in here. Now we're about ready to add a subdivision level, so I'll press Ctrl D. That adds a new subdivision level, and we can continue working from here. I may at this point switch to the clay tubes brush, turning off my alpha. I use the clay tubes brush with no alpha far more often than I do use the alpha. So I use this to continue to refine the underlying skeletal anatomy of the skull, the temporal ridge here. Very, very important to establish the cheekbones early on, as well as the angle of the mandible or the jaw. So I'm going to get that locked in there. Take the damn standard brush, just do a little bit of creasing up in here, just to get a nice depth in that eye socket. Take the move brush, and I just want to pull those faces along that eyelid down. We're going to add a subtool for eyeballs here in just a moment, so we've got something to actually sculpt around, and it really helps sort of connect to the character once you've got an eyeball in there. It gives you a sense of purpose and a sense of presence once there's eyes in there, and I find it a lot easier to sculpt once I've got something like that in place. Let's pull those corners of the mouth down. Maybe pull them back a little bit. So let's go ahead and add those eyeballs in there. I'll do that by going to the light box, go to the tool menu, and I'll just double click a polysphere. Now again, that appears to replace my character, but the character's still here. The polysphere is now loaded into the tool menu. So I'll go to Subtool, Append, and I'll append that polysphere in. Now that comes up here. I'm going to select it by alt-clicking on it, or you can click here in the Subtool menu to select it. I'll press W for Move, and this time I will turn the gizmo on. You see the gizmo is far down here. I'm going to unlock the gizmo and click this, go to Unmasked Mesh Center, and then lock it again. That'll center the pivot. I can scale this down now, and I can place it in the eyeball, or in the eye socket. There we go. And then I'll go to Z Plugin, Subtool Master, Mirror, into one subtool across the X-axis. Click OK, and that should give me a subtool for 2 eyeballs. So now I can go back to the head, and it'll be a lot easier now to shape those eyelids because we have a sphere to actually work with. So let's go ahead and shift these around. I'm going to pull the medial canthus away from the surface of the eyeball there. Scooch these up. Let's mask the lower lid so we can really affect the corner there. This can be a tricky area to sculpt because we need to get a little crease there. So already at this number 1 subdivision level, I'm already thinking about that crease. I'll invert that mask and tuck these edges up under. Now it looks very rough right now, but as soon as we add subdivision levels, it'll really start to come into its own, and you'll start to see that form. And it'll be far nicer because we started it at a lower subdivision level than it would be if we tried to sculpt it while we have like a million polygons. So let's just think about some of the forms of the face here. Get the fatty tissues of the cheeks, the nasolabial fold. I'm already thinking about the nasolabial fold. Again, make shapes at the lowest possible subdivision level that will support the shape you're trying to make. It might be a little difficult to get that sort of idea across to you at the very outset, but you'll get it. And once you start doing it, your work will improve vastly because you're not going to be fighting against that lumpy look as often as you would if you didn't take into account how much you can do at a lower subdivision. And this methodology is why I prefer sculpting with subdivision levels to sculpting in Dynamesh. I'll start meshes in Dynamesh, but I'll leave Dynamesh mode quite soon because I think once you've established your volumes, there's really no need to stay in Dynamesh mode. It's perfectly fine to go ahead and convert into a subdivision model and then start working with subdivisions after you've started it with Dynamesh. I'll bounce back and forth between the two tool sets. I'm going to move down here to the neck and start thinking about clavicles. Don't quite have enough geometry to get those in there, but I'm still going to start suggesting them. Pectoralis muscles. And Control D to add a subdivision level. And you see that that already improves the look of those sternomastoid muscles because we created them down here at the lowest possible subdivision level that could handle them. Let's sketch in some clavicles here. Don't worry if they're a little overstated because we are going to add a subdivision level and that will naturally sort of scale them back a little bit. And of course we can smooth as we work. Start to build up that deltoid a little bit. And put our spine of the scapula in here. Border the scapula. Turn down the Z intensity on our smooth brush and just do a little bit of smoothing to this area. Go back to our move brush and just make some adjustments here to the mouth. Get a tubes brush and let's tinker around with the nose here. Take the move brush and we'll just make some changes to the shape of the nose. It is a sketch, so these things can continue to sort of develop as you work. If you don't like the nose right away, you can continue tweaking those shapes and find something that you like. I think it's important not to get stuck on any one particular area for too long. If you find yourself sort of overworking an area, step away from it for a bit. Move on to something else and then come back to it. It will make itself known. It will resolve itself as you keep working on it. But if you're not making progress, move on to something else. I'm always trying to move around the model as I'm working. I try not to ever stay in one area too long because then you just overwork that one particular area. So I'll step back down to my lowest subdivision level, and I just want to make some big shape changes to the mesh down here at level 1. Always make your big shape changes on the lowest subdivision level, and then step back up, and anything you change at the low level will telegraph back up to the higher levels as well. So we'll just change the angle of the jawline. We've used a mask to isolate that. And we want to use our polygroups to adjust the ear, so Control-Shift-Click on the ear, polygroup. Control-Click on the background to mask it. Control-Shift-Click on the background to view everything again, and then Control-Click to invert the mask. And then we'll use the move brush to change that ear shape around without affecting the rest of the body. Now I want to rotate the ear slightly, so I'll go to R for rotate, and that brings up the gizmo. If I hold down the Alt key and then click on one of the corners, I can move the pivot to about there, and then I'm just going to move that out and rotate it back. Go back to my move brush and just adjust those shapes. Now I want to change the shape of the eye, so I'm going to mask the eye area, invert that mask, take my move brush and just turn it up pretty large, and I'm just going to spread the eye area out a little bit. Take my move brush and just enlarge the eyes. Alt-click on the polysphere that we've got for the eyeballs. That selects that, and I'll just go back to W for move. Now you'll see the gizmo for move is actually way down here, and I want to center it. So I'm going to turn off X symmetry, unlock the gizmo, reset it, and then click Go to Unmasked Mesh Center. Now we'll lock the gizmo again, and then we can move those spheres out. Now Alt-click on the head to select that Z tool. And with my move brush, I'm just going to adjust those shapes around the eyes. So as I do this, just if I go to Shift F, I can view my polyframe, just to make sure that I'm keeping the topology pretty consistent, keeping the edge flow accurate around the eye, so we're not sort of destroying that ordered mesh too much. We want to make sure that we still maintain all the edge flow and topology, so the eye area will still deform accurately when eventually this is animated. I'm going to step up a subdivision level with the D hotkey. And just do a little bit of tweaks to the nose here. Let's bring that muzzle forward a little bit. just adjust the shape of the mouth. And again, I'll take the move brush and just adjust the cheekbone. Always trying to be very careful to maintain a sense of there being skeletal and muscular anatomy underneath that motivates all the shapes that I'm making. And we'll adjust the brow area here. Once again, mask the eye area. I just want to adjust this brow, making sure that we don't impact the soft tissues around the eye. I just want to work on the sort of the frown lines and the furrowing of the brow here. I'm going to go to the standard brush, using my hotkeys to select brushes, by the way. If you haven't watched it yet, be sure to watch the video on hotkeys, because I think it's very important as you're sculpting to utilize the hotkeys for your brush selections. It's far, far easier than just B for brush, S for standard, and then T to select the standard brush. Having your own custom hotkeys, I think, makes all the difference in your speed and efficiency while you're working. Just using the damn standard brush here to add a couple sort of indentations, creases. Again, at a very low subdivision level. I'll step up one more subdivision level now and start to continue to refine these shapes. If I hold down the Alt key while I'm using the damn standard brush, it gives a nice pinch. I find that pretty useful for doing things like the lips. We'll turn off frame mode with Shift F. And I'm going to go to the inflate brush and just do a little bit of inflating around the mouth area here. I just want to sort of pucker these shapes to give a sense of sort of gravity and weight here. I'm going to mask this jowl right here, this little bit of sagging skin. Invert that mask, and I'll take the inflate brush and just run it along the lower edge, and that just helps sag that piece down a little bit. Take the move brush and just give it a little bit of kind of a teardrop shape, so it feels like that's maybe heavy skin sort of sagging right there, so it feels quite like a jowl. Go back to frame mode, Shift F, step down my subdivision levels, and I want to do a little bit of maintenance here on the eyelids. I just want to pull this topology out a little bit more. See where the eyelid topology is sort of turning inside out here just a little bit. I'm just going to turn my draw size down so I can just grab individual points very easily. And let's just make sure that these are sitting exactly where I want them to. I'm just going to conform these up against the eyeball itself. Bring these down. Make sure that we get the thickness of the eyelid there. Step up with the D hotkey. That brings us up one subdivision level. Here we go. Conform that back against the surface of the eyelid, or eyeball, I mean to say. I'll take the inflate brush now and just do a little bit of an inflate, just to give some nice thickness to the eyelids. A lot of times people neglect to realize just how thick the eyelid can actually be, and that can look very strange if you don't get that in there. So let's go ahead and get a little bit of a crease here and here, step up our subdivision levels, and we can already see what we're getting. Let's take our clay tubes brush. I'm just going to run that clay tubes brush along the edge of the eye here and get that eyelid extending, that crease in the outer eyelid. Take our move brush and just do a little bit of tweaks to this shape here. Now I'm going to mask out the eye bag, invert the mask, and again I'll take my move brush and I just want to tug that eye bag down. Take the inflate brush and I'm going to control click on the mask, and if you can control click on the masked area, it will feather that mask. I want to erase the mask here a little bit, so I press Control and Alt together, and that allows me to feather that mask. And then I'll take the inflate brush and I'm just going to inflate that corner, that eye bag there, so it sort of puckers over the cheekbone next to it. Control click on the background and that will invert that mask, and I'm going to inflate the shapes that are just next to it as well, just to give it a little bit of a sense of compression there. Turn off frame mode, and there we go. I'm going to widen the nostrils a little bit. Bring the clay tubes brush here, and let's change up the shape of this nose a little bit more. Take the move brush. Just want to adjust the shapes of those nostrils a little bit more. build out the shape, the tip of the nose. That's called the alar cartilage. That's the very, very tip of the nose. I just want to give it a very distinctive shape there. And I'll take my standard brush, hold down the Alt key, and create the filter. Sometimes it's called the Cupid's bow. It's that little indentation just between the bottom of the nose and the upper lip. And then using the damn standard brush, just do a little bit of a suggestion of the upper lip shape here. And with my damn standard brush, I'm going to go in and add a couple more creases along the lower eyelid and along the upper eyelid. So you might notice right here that the orientation of the mesh when it came in is not actually sitting. So we're looking down the Z axis. So if you find something like this, now it may have come in flipped because of the orientation in the originating program, or it may just be that your mesh is upside down and you need to correct it. So if you find yourself in a situation like this, here's how we can rotate the entire character, including the eyeballs, to match it to the correct orientation. I'll go to R for rotate, unlock my gizmo, and go to unmask mesh center, and then reset the gizmo. Lock it again. Now click this rectangle here, and that gives me the pizza box stack. Sometimes Pixelogic calls it the pizza boxes. This creates a transpose stack, so every subtool will now be transposed. I'll hold down the Shift key, and I'm just going to click and drag, and you can see the number readout right down here. It gives me the number of degrees that are being changed. So I'm just going to rotate it around until I get to 180. And there we go. So now we've corrected the orientation of the character. If you want to learn more about Gizmo, there's also a video that specifically just talks about Gizmo and transpose. So I recommend that you take a look at that as well if you have not already. I'm just going to fill out the trachea and the underside of the chin here. Now I want to change the scale of the body in comparison to the head. So I'm going to step down my subdivision levels. I'm going to mask out the head. Anytime the head is larger than the body, something starts to look rather childlike or adolescent. So what I want to do here is I want to actually scale the body so it's a bit larger than the head. So I've moved my gizmo there, and I need to untick the pizza boxes, and then click and drag, and then we can adjust that scale of the head to the body. There we go. So now we get a bit of a better proportion there. Just smooth that transition. And I'll select the magnify brush, turn my Z intensity down quite low on that, and just do a little bit of magnify here at the jawline, at the trapezius muscles, the deltoid muscles. I'm going to make sure that I look at the model from underneath, and I'm going to adjust things like the shape of the mouth, make sure that it really is conforming around a cylindrical form here. We don't want any of our facial features to become too flat, which there's a danger of that as you're working. Things can become flattened if you're working from the front view for too long. So let's just adjust that. Let's bring the cheekbones forward just a bit, and maybe widen that jawline just a bit. I'm going to step up my subdivision levels and go to the clay tubes brush and just fill out the temporal fold, or the temporal fossa here, the hollow at the sides of the skull, just to give it a sense of there being a temporalis muscle in there. That's one of the muscles that helps open and close the jaw. If you clench your jaw and put your fingertips there at your temples, sometimes where you might feel that you have a headache, that's your temporalis muscle. I'm going to use the move brush just to spread out the shape of this frontal eminence. That's the sort of the mound at the front of the skull there. I'm going to turn off X symmetry, go in with my damn standard brush, and add some asymmetrical detailing to the brow furrow here. Step up another subdivision level. Now we don't have another subdivision level at this point. If I go to the geometry menu, you see that we're actually at our top subdivision level. So I'm going to press Control D, and that adds a new subdivision level and gives us more geometry to play with and detail with. So this allows us to go in here and start to create a bit more shapes. Go into with Clay Tubes brush. I'm just going to fill out that recess a little bit. The Clay Tubes brush I really do like because it does tend to fill into the recessed areas first, which is really nice when you're trying to like sculpt into like a furrow or sculpt into a wrinkle that's perhaps gone too deep, which is possible. It's possible to make wrinkles too deep. You can just fill them out ever so slightly just using the Clay Tubes brush. I'm going to use the inflate brush to sort of pucker those shapes there. Go to my damn standard brush and put some creasing here. Oops, that's too much. Let's step down our subdivision levels. And I'm going to mask the brow here. And I just want to adjust the length of the nasal bone. Go to the move brush, turn on X symmetry. I'm just going to bring that nose down a little bit. Feather that mask, bring the brow out. There we go. Step back up our subdivision levels. Turn off X symmetry, and with the damn standard brush, I'm just going to add some creasing here. There we go. And while I'm at it, I'm going to start putting some asymmetrical kind of folds coming up out of the mouth. Smooth those back a little bit with the smooth brush. Go with the Clay Tubes brush, and I can sort of fill that in just a bit. Go back in with damn standard, and let's create a few more details there. Turn on our X symmetry. With my Clay Tubes brush, I'm just going to accentuate those cheekbones. And I really want to maintain this sense here of the lower border of the ocular orbit, or the eye socket. I always really like sculpting this particular area because I like getting that sense of a bony kind of region in the cheekbone butting up against this softer region here at the nasolabial fold. So with the Clay Tubes brush selected, I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and that will help me create kind of a little plane. And whenever you're sculpting organics, I think it's very important to keep an idea of your planar layout, because all shapes sculpturally can be broken down into planar analysis. If you do a Google search for planar analysis human head, you'll find a whole bunch of different illustrations of a head broken down into simple planes. And it's a really great sort of learning tool when you're trying to learn to sculpt, is to examine how the planes of the face relate to one another. And as I sculpt, I'm often thinking about that, and I'm actually using the Clay Tubes brush to create those planes. So here I'll take the Clay Tubes brush and I'll create a plane for the side of the masseter muscle. And for the jaw here, just thinking about this in terms of planar analysis. So you will sculpt those planes, but you don't necessarily keep them. You will smooth them back, but it's still, if you begin your sculpture thinking about the planar analysis and then smooth them away, you will end up maintaining that kind of structural integrity. It will carry through, and your sculpture will benefit from it. I'm going to take the move brush and just adjust this brow a little bit. Take that Clay Tubes brush, and I just want to continue out the side of that ocular orbit. We'll come down here and revisit our clavicles. Take the standard brush, hold down the Alt key, and I'm just going to create a little hollow here between the deltoid muscle and the pectoralis muscles. The name for this is called the infraclavicular fossa. It's a nice little landmark. You'll see it a lot on very, very fit people or very, very skinny people. It's just the hollow in between those two muscle groups, the deltoid and where the pectoralis muscle tips in underneath the deltoid and grabs onto the humerus bone. Build out the sternum here, working very, very quickly and gesturally. Don't worry about being super accurate and super, focused in on one area. Sculpt quickly and smooth, move around, and return to things. You don't have to make every shape perfect on the first go. And that might be a strange thing to sort of internalize if you're new to sculpting and new to ZBrush, but don't try and make everything perfect in the first go. You can come back to it, and I think it's more of a waste of time, and it's harder if you just find yourself like struggling over one area for ages, rather than moving around, moving on to the next one. Just sketch the lines in, get the shapes in there. So I'm putting in the borders of the scapula, and then I'm moving away from it. I'll come back to it. Hitting it with a little bit of smooth. Take my standard brush, and I'm just going to, oops, that's too strong. Let's turn down our Z intensity. I'm going to work around the shape of the sternocleidomastoid. Take my standard brush, push in a little bit of a hollow there, and then let's pull out these ropey kind of tendons. These are called the platysma. I just wanted to suggest those there. Take my clay tubes brush, and let's fill out this hollow here. This is where the trapezius muscles are grabbing onto the back of the skull, as well as the various erector scapulae or levator scapulae muscles and everything that's underneath that that trapezius muscle, which is actually quite a thin sheet of muscle. Really what gives it most of its shape are the muscles underneath it. So we just want to build that up a bit. Take my move brush, and I'm just going to adjust that shape there. Smooth it back. I'm just going to step down my subdivision level, take my shift smooth brush, turn the Z intensity down, and I'm just going to smooth this whole area down here at the lowest subdivision level, and then step back up. And you see, this is a nice technique because it maintains those shapes, but it makes them a lot more subtle. So I find that to be a really, really useful thing to do as I'm working on an area. If I just want to make it a little bit more subtle, I will do that. I will step down to a lower subdivision level and do a very, very light smoothing on it, and then step back up. Let's take my move brush, and let's adjust these clavicles. Clay tubes brush, and let's adjust the deltoid here. Take the damp standard brush. Get the striations of that pectoralis muscle and the deltoid muscle. These can be overstated right now. They don't have to be exact. We can, again, smooth things back a bit as we go on. Let's fill in that infraclavicular fossa a little bit so it's not quite so profound. Do a little bit of smoothing to this whole area here, and then step back up. And you see it makes that all a bit more subtle. You can just accentuate, catch a little bit of shadow here, smooth that back. I'm going to use my damp standard brush and create a couple little wrinkles over the ear here. And anytime I sculpt a wrinkle, I always try and go back and do an additive stroke along with it. So I'll cut a crease in using the damp standard brush, and then I'll come in and very, very gently take the standard brush and add a little bit of volume to it. So all the wrinkles don't have to just be negative spaces that are cut into the mesh. We do have a little bit of volume where the skin is puckering or being compressed in the wrinkle. Build out that cheekbone a little bit. Now let's take a look at the ears. I'm going to step down my subdivision levels and go into frame mode and just do a little bit of tweaking here with the move brush. I'm just going to bring that polygroup, that blue polygroup, over a little bit. Do a little bit of smoothing to even all of that out. Go back to my move brush and just tweak this shape a bit. Now with the ear, there's three parts of the ear that we want to be concerned with. There is the helix, which is the outermost border of the ear. There's the antihelix, which is the little Y-shaped bit that sits inside, and then the tragus. And then there's smaller bits and pieces which are quite important to get the shape, but those are kind of the three main forms. The tragus and the ear lobe, of course. So what I'll do is I'll take the inflate brush and I'm just going to inflate the outermost border of the ear, that being the helix. I'm going to isolate the ear so I don't end up adjusting something on the head itself when I really just want to be working on the earlobe. So let's get this shape in there. Take the damn standard brush and just get the border of that really established. Take the inflate brush, make sure that we've got enough volume here to work with. Now I'm going to take my standard brush and I'm going to push in the whole of the ear here. That's called the conch of the ear. And I'm going to basically go around the underside of the helix and just really accentuate that shape. So the helix of the ear comes around like this and it has a little leg that dips inside right there. If you look at your ear in the mirror, you'll see this. That's just called the leg of the helix. That just dips right down there inside the ear and just helps it give the ear that shape that you'll recognize. Now right here we're going to have the tragus. The tragus is a little pointy out bit of skin that if you were to sort of plug your ears with your fingers, it might be the piece that you push inside your ear. It sort of helps protect the ear hole. So we're just going to scooch that out a little bit. So we've got that visible. Take the inflate brush and just give it some volume. And I'll take the move brush and just tug this little shape down here. There we go. So now what we want to do is we want to think about the antihelix. That's the Y-shaped bit right here that we were talking about. Now I'm going to mask that, invert the mask, and I'm just going to take the clay tubes brush and sort of build that shape up. Let's turn off frame mode so it's actually a bit easier to see what we're doing. Just want to build that up. Take the standard brush, create the little Y shape here. Let's go ahead and push this in. Smooth it back. Do a little bit of masking around the helix here. Invert that mask. Take the move brush and we'll just pull the helix over the antihelix a little bit. Do some smoothing there. Invert that mask and I'll pull the antihelix up under the helix, and that just helps create a little crease there, a real sense of delineation between those two shapes. The shape of this ear is a little different because it's a pointed ear, but we're really following the standards of the human ear. I think whenever you're trying to do fantasy anatomy, you should always try and fall back on actual human anatomy as much as possible. It just gives the viewer something to hold on to. They may not understand human anatomy in terms of naming things and understanding their structure, but they still will recognize the shapes. And when they see shapes that they recognize, they'll say, oh, that looks real. So let's take our standard brush, build out that Y shape a little bit. There we go. Let's come around to the back. There we go. Getting a nice kind of goblin-y creature ear here. Let's inflate this, isolate it again with our polygrip. Take the move brush and let's just adjust the shape of the earlobe here. Take the inflate brush, inflate it out. There we go. That gives us a nice ear here. I'm going to go to the move brush and I'm going to go to brush, curve, and I'm going to turn on accurate curve mode. And that just makes the move brush give me a much sharper point. I use this a lot when I'm trying to make spines or spikes or points. It's a really nice little brush tweak that's not necessarily very well known. It's well hidden there in the interface, and a lot of people don't realize that it's there, but I find it very, very useful in my own work. I'm going to go to the damn standard brush, and again, I want to just do a little crease along the front of the ear here. Smooth that back. Take the standard brush, and let's just let those wrinkles flow out like that. There we go. Cool, now I'm going to go ahead and save my work. And now we're going to go ahead and add another subdivision level so we can put a little bit more detail into the character. Use my damn standard brush to sort of catch shadow, areas around the muscles, and any bony landmarks. I just want to just subtly and accentuate those. Stepping down our subdivision levels, and then use the move brush again to make big shape changes. Just want to tweak the shape of the head, the cranial mass, the occipital, the shape of the ear. We'll just tweak that using the move brush down here at level 1. And I just want to tweak the shape of the eyelids here. Make sure that we get that characteristic arc right there. It's more extreme, closer to the inner corner of the eye, and the lower eyelid, it's the opposite. It's on the outer corner. So I want to make sure that we get those in there. Then we'll step back up our subdivision levels, turn off X symmetry, and then just going in with the damn standard brush, just tweaking around the shapes of the nose here. And just creating some radiating folds, or wrinkles I should say, coming out of the mouth. And I want to get these shapes on either side of the mouth, the lower lip here. That's the bottom of the orbicularis oris muscle. Take my clay tubes brush and let's step down a couple subdivision levels and build those up. Smooth that back and then step back up our subdivisions. Smooth that a little bit and then turn off X symmetry, and we'll go back in now and play around with some of the wrinkles and the shapes here. Again, don't be afraid to just be sketchy. Like, treat it like you might treat sketching with a pencil. And just work quickly and very gesturally around the shapes and come back to them. I'm going to step down, turn on X symmetry, and using my clay tubes brush here to adjust that lower lip shape a little bit. Fill in that hollow there and smooth it. Take the standard brush, play around with the shape of that lower lip. And I think I'm actually going to make that lower lip bigger. So I'm going to isolate the lower jaw. I'm going to take the move brush, and I'm going to pull the shapes of that lower lip down. Because the upper lip is quite thin, I think I'd like some contrast here and make the lower lip quite thick by comparison. Smooth that a bit, take the inflate brush and give it a little bit of an inflate. Let's mask that and then invert the mask, and we'll take the move brush and we can kind of adjust the other shapes there to match. Step back up our subdivision levels, go in with our damn standard brush, get the crease, the ledge of the lower lip. Let's see that little line of demarcation there between the soft fleshiness, the pillar of the lip, and the edge of the muscle, the orbicularis oris muscle. You often see that represented at the lower border of the mouth there. There we go. Let's create just a little archaic smile there, not too much. Smooth that area back. Hit it with a clay tubes brush. Oops, that's too much. Let's turn down the Z intensity on our clay tubes brush. There we go. I'm going to take the standard brush, get a little bit of a cleft in the chin there. Smooth that back and then fill it out slightly with the clay tubes brush. Damn standard brush. Again, thinking about the creases here, and we're going to turn off X symmetry for this. We don't want these wrinkles and these shapes around the mouth to be too symmetrical. That would really call attention to itself. Take my standard brush, turn off on X symmetry again, and I want to adjust the shapes of the nose. Step down my subdivision levels. So you see, this is something that I really want you to like take away from this particular lesson is when we're working with subdivision levels as opposed to working with Dynamesh, just how often we're moving between subdivisions, how often we're stepping up and down, because it's a really important thing I think to be able to do is to move up your subdivision levels to add detail, and then move down your subdivision levels to add or to adjust form. And of course, when we're using Dynamesh, we don't have that luxury. Dynamesh just gives you a single subdivision level. Now, if you watch the tutorial on Dynamesh, or watch the Quick Start tutorial, which utilizes Dynamesh, you'll see that, Dynamesh is incredibly powerful. If you watch the dedicated Dynamesh or tutorial for converting Dynamesh to subdivision, you can see that we can actually leverage the strengths of both techniques. And I think that's a really important thing to understand how to do, because while Dynamesh is very, very powerful, this ability to step down and just make big overarching changes like this to the shape is integral to actually just doing good form, doing an effective sculpture in Zbrush. And I think a lot of people don't get that at the beginning of their Zbrush journey. They don't learn that lesson quite yet. And that makes it harder, I think, to do the best possible work, because they'll be struggling often against the millions and millions of polygons that they're dealing with in Dynamesh and never quite getting the strength and the importance of being able to step down your subdivisions. I just want to flare those nostrils up a little bit and then step up our subdivision levels. Let's take our damn standard again. There we go. I'm going to isolate the upper lip, and I'm going to mask out the upper lip right up to that sharp edge. What I want to do is I want to create this sort of soft fleshiness of the upper lip, just like we have on the lower lip. I'll step down my subdivision levels for that, and I'll use the inflate brush just to inflate this a little bit. Smooth it, inflate it again. I just want to get a real sense of the volume of the upper lip. Let's invert that mask and just do a tiny bit of inflating along that border. Step back up our subdivision levels, and we'll take our damn standard brush, turn off the X symmetry, and I'm just going to just suggest some of the wrinkling in the upper lip. There we go. Clear the mask. Oops, there we go. Now let's do the same for the lower. I'll isolate the lower lip. Let's mask it out. Make sure that we turn on our X symmetry. Roll around to the inside of the mouth here. Invert that mask. Step down a couple subdivision levels. And we did get already some nice volume here in the lower lip. So I'm just going to go to the inside of the lip here and just make sure that it's got volume on the inside as well, so it doesn't just sort of flatten out there. Step up to our highest subdivision level. Take the damn standard brush. Turn off my X symmetry and just... So in a situation like this, this is kind of interesting. I'm trying to run a stroke back and forth along here. This is a nice trick. If you lock the camera, you're not going to actually rotate it if you click and drag on the background. So this allows me to start my stroke actually off the model. There we go. Let's unlock the camera, move it over. Lock it again. It just makes it easier when I'm trying to make these strokes where it doesn't try and move the model anytime I step or anytime I accidentally click somewhere that's not on the mesh itself. There we go. Let's take the inflate brush. Now for the inflate brush, I'm going to turn the brush up, turn the focal shift up, and turn my Z intensity down. And this has a real interesting kind of puckering effect as well. It's very, very subtle because I've got the Z intensity turned down quite low, but it's something I recommend that you try because it inflates in a... Oops. Thought that didn't look right. I'm not on the inflate brush. There we go. Select the inflate brush, turn the draw size up, and turn the focal shift down, and my Z intensity down. And that should... There we go. It inflates in more of a flattened kind of plateau. Let's invert that mask. Do the same down here. I'm going to take the clay tubes brush and I just want to make that crease underneath the chin, or underneath the lip above the chin, a little bit more shallow. Smooth that back and then reveal all. I'm going to isolate the upper lip with a mask. Take the move brush, turn on my X symmetry, and just want to adjust the shapes of that. Always remember that you can move around and look at things from other perspectives than just straight on. Let's invert that mask. Let's isolate the lower lip. Maybe pull that one down a little bit. Step down our subdivision levels for that. Let's pull that down just slightly. Invert the mask. And let's see what happens if we pull that upper lip forward just a little bit. We're starting to get rid of that underbite that we created. No, I don't like that. I kind of like the underbite, so we're going to keep it. So let's invert that and just bring this down. I just want to really make it feel like those lips are interacting. There we go. Step back up our subdivision levels. Go back to my damn standard brush. There we go. Clear the mask. Turn my X symmetry back on, and I'm just using the damn standard brush with the Alt key to create sort of a bit of a plane there on the nostrils. Go in with the standard brush, fill out the body of that a little bit. Go with the clay tubes brush, build up that sort of nasolabial compression there. I'm going to step down my subdivision levels and I'm going to mask out the nose. I'm going to mask this whole area out right here. And I'm going to take the move brush and I just want to adjust the fat of the nasolabial fold here where it's running up against the nostril, where the nasal furrow, as it were, is actually displacing or pushing that skin up. Go to the inflate brush. Let's inflate that. Clear the mask. Do a little bit of smooth. Now, here's an interesting thing. I've got this little crease right there in that tight corner. I'm going to use my visibility marquee. That's Control, Shift, Click, and Drag to isolate that area. And then we go into the inside of the mesh here. And if I go to Tool, Display Properties, and turn on Double-Sided, I can now see the inside of the model. And here I can smooth from the inside, and I can fix this sort of polygon taco where that's getting turned inside out there. I can fix that area. Take the inflate brush and hold down the Alt key, and that'll negative inflate from the inside, and that'll fix that problem area. Come here to the front, take my inflate brush, and then you just inflate them normally. So that's a really nice trick there to go in and fix areas that are being a problem. You can actually sculpt from the inside. For example, if I needed to deepen the nostrils, I could just inflate from the inside, and that will pull those nostrils in. Control Shift Click on the background reveals everything again. And just going to the standard brush, think about that eye socket we were talking about. And let's do a little bit of detailing. I want to tweak that nose a little bit. Still not quite happy with the shape of that nose. Putting a little bit of asymmetry into it. Turning my symmetry back on to tweak the eye socket or the cheekbones. Turning it off again to tweak the brow here. Stepping down my subdivision levels. And I'm going to mask out, turn my X symmetry back on. I'm going to mask out the lower lid. And I just want to bring the lower lid up a little bit. I want it to be compressed up slightly by that nasolabial furrow. mask the eye area. I just want to play around with getting a little bit more sort of malicious intent here. Just furrowing that brow, letting it come down a little bit further. Control click on the mask to feather it. There we go. That feels a little bit more intense. Just like that sharper angle there. And let's sharpen the angle here. I'm going to press down with the move brush, hold the shift key, and then drag, and that slides faces. So touch down with the move brush, press and hold the shift key. Let's clear our mask. And it will slide faces up or down or left and right along the mesh. So it's a nice little trick. There we go. All right. So let's save our work, and then we'll just do a little bit of detailing. So now we just want to put a light level of detail on here, just to break up the really smooth kind of procedural blend shader look of the whole thing. So what we'll do is, let's go ahead and turn our perspective back on. Let's go to Draw and increase our focal length. And I'm going to take the standard brush, and I'm going to switch just to one of the standard alphas, for example, alpha 56. And if you go to the alpha menu and invert it, so it's actually white on black, when you come in here now and hold down the Alt key, make sure we're at our highest subdivision level. I'm actually going to add a subdivision level, so we're up to 1,000,000 polygons now. We're able to get a nice texture if we hold down the Alt key. I'm going to divide one more time, so we've just got a little bit more fidelity. Turn our Z intensity down. Hold down the Alt key, and I'm just going to make circular motions just to create a little tooth, just a little breakup in that specular highlight. And this is just a really nice kind of cross-hatched pattern. Feels a lot like skin. I'm going to turn off X symmetry when I get to the center line here. Again, anytime I'm at the center line of the mesh, I always try and turn the X symmetry off, because it's just naturally going to create symmetrical patterns that the eye will pick up on. On some level, you'll see it, and it won't feel natural. I'm not going to put detail on the back of the head because I want to show you a neat trick to do that procedurally using the Noisemaker. The Noisemaker is a plugin for ZBrush that allows you to create noise. We have an entire chapter on it, but we'll just dive into it a little bit here because it's really useful for breaking up that big open area of the back of the head and the torso and whatnot. So let's bring this through here, put a little bit of this skin detail down into the muzzle. Now we have a whole chapter just on detailing and alphas, so this is not our only look at this process, but I thought it would be a nice thing to add on to the very end of our tutorial here, just so we get that extra little bit of detail. Now down here in the neck area, let's switch to a different alpha. We'll do alpha 57. And again, I'm just doing that circular patterning. Just making circles with the brush, and it just creates naturally, by virtue of the stroke and the alpha, this nice cross-hatched kind of look. And I'm letting the texture get larger as we go down the torso. Turning off X symmetry, and let's just go over the center line here. Turn our draw size down a little bit. Make sure that we don't neglect the underside of the chin, things like that. Now I'm going to switch to alpha 58. Alpha 58, again, I'll hold down the Alt key. And alpha 58 is great for creating sort of like these creasing wrinkles. I really, really like this brush quite a bit. So I'm going to bring these wrinkles around. through the neck here. Let's turn off X symmetry, and I just want to get some creasing in the neck here. Let these wrinkles sort of flow down underneath or over the pectoralis muscles and around this the dip there in the clavicle. And I'll radiate some of these wrinkles out from the armpit, sort of where the skin there would be buckling quite a bit. Remember that I've got X symmetry turned off right now, so I'll need to do it on both sides. And I'll come into the forehead here, turn my draw size up quite large, and I just want to give some wrinkles in the forehead area. And this alpha is really good for that sort of thing. Holding down the Alt key, let's radiate some of these wrinkles up out of the furrow here. And again, I always treat wrinkles as sort of broken up, hashed lines. I never try and make them one continuous wrinkle. I can turn on my X symmetry here at the side of the head. This is fine. Turn my draw size down, and let's bring these around into the eye area here. Let's get some nice tissuey wrinkles along the eyelids here. Turn our Z intensity up just a bit. Go into my damn standard brush again, make sure that we have our X symmetry turned on. And I just want to get that little crease right there. Just want to sharpen that up. Turn our draw size down so it's a bit sharper. There we go. And go back to our standard brush with that Alpha 58. And I just want to create some wrinkle patterns coming up out of the nostrils here. Turning off our X symmetry again once we get close to the center line. We just want to bring those wrinkles out through the nose here. Turn our draw size up, and I will Control-Shift-Click on the upper mouth polygroup. And what I want to do is turn down my Z intensity and just give some wrinkles that radiate up out of the mouth area here. Maybe turn that Z intensity up just a little bit more. There we go. Again, holding down the Alt key, and I'm letting those radiate out over the nasolabial folds. Now's a good time to save our work. And we'll do the same thing for the lower jaw here. We'll isolate it, and then holding down the Alt key, let's just create some big wrinkles that radiate out and down from there. I'm going to turn up my Z intensity just a little bit. Hit that with the smooth brush. And there we go. Now, let's put some texture on the back of the head here. So I just wanted to show you a way that we can very quickly apply texture to these areas. If we just want like an overarching kind of procedural noise, I'm going to mask out this area. We'll include the ears in this as well. I'm going to step down my subdivision levels, and let's isolate the ear polygroup and mask that by Control-clicking on the background. There we go. And we'll just carry that mask up through here. And then we'll invert the mask and step all the way back up to our highest subdivision level. Now I'll go to Surface, turn on Noise, and this opens up the Noise Maker. And again, we have a whole chapter just on Noise Maker, but you navigate in here just like you navigate in the regular ZBrush window. So I can change my noise scale here, turn it down. I can change my strength, make it negative, and just give myself a nice little sort of tooth to this area, just a little bit of detail. Click OK. And there you see we've got some noise detail on there, but that's procedural. I can hide that by turning the noise on and off. So I want to bake it into the mesh by clicking Apply to Mesh. And that will then bake that down. So that is actually part of the detail. So that's just a really quick way to add detail to a character. Perhaps you want to put a first pass down of just some noise to break up a surface before you go in and detail it manually. That's a nice way to go about doing that. Some of these wrinkles through the back of the neck. And there we go. So now this is how you import a mesh into ZBrush and then sculpt a new character from that imported mesh. If we step all the way down to our lowest subdivision level, we've maintained our topology. Any UVs would still be maintained on this mesh, so we could then extract displacement and color and normal maps from this, export that back to the originating application, and export our low res. And it would be a seamless transition as long as you maintain more or less the same shapes. If I were to pull giant horns out of this, or change the mesh by dynameshing it, then I would lose those elements. But because we basically imported a mesh and then used our move brush at the lowest subdivision level to shape it into a new character and then sculpt it on top of that, we're able to maintain those utilities like the UVs, or if you have weight maps or anything else that rely on this topology and these UVs, then those will transfer over. You might need to do a little bit of tweaking, but the important thing to note is very, very often you will be tasked with bringing in an existing model and then sculpting on that model. So the purpose of this chapter is to illustrate for you just how to go about doing that effectively, and also to give you some further looks at different techniques of sculpting, different brushes, using masking and polygroups. So I hope you found this chapter helpful, and you can go forward and use some of these tools and techniques in your own workflow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.